the distance, you'll see one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Great Pyramids of Giza. You are looking at the last remaining wonder. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, they're gone. The monumental 40-foot statue of Zeus in Greece, it no longer exists. The temple to Artemis in Ephesus, it's a rubble heap today. So what you're seeing here today is special. These pyramids represented Egypt at the height of its glory. We're here to talk about a man named Moses and his collision course with this mighty empire. Pharaoh's rule in the land of Egypt, and one rises to power that is threatened by the Israelites. He was worried that they would take sides with an invading force and overcome them. He attempts to break their spirits, but during this time of oppression, the Hebrews only multiplied more and more. Desperate to control the population of God's people, Pharaoh orders midwives to kill all Hebrew males at birth. The Bible also tells us that the Egyptians at that time loathed the Israelites. This shows a deep-seated prejudice toward God's people, and now it has come to a head, and innocent baby boys are being thrown into the Nile River at Pharaoh's command. This is a Nile full of crocodiles and vicious wildlife. There is daily friction between these two people groups, and this is the environment into which Moses the deliverer is birthed. After Moses is born, his mother hides him for 3 months to keep him alive. Out of desperation, she makes a basket, waterproofs it, and sends her precious baby boy down the river. So what Pharaoh's daughter finds the baby, and she's smitten. She decides to keep the baby as her own and raise him. The sister of Moses follows the floating basket at a distance. And at the opportune time, she makes herself known by suggesting a Hebrew nursemaid, which just happens to be the mother of Moses. For some time, Moses interacts with his biological family. Some would even say it's up to 12 years before he begins his studies in Egypt. This would have ensured completion of his Hebrew studies. But regardless of how long he spent with his Hebrew people, this story from beginning to end shows a deep connection to his Hebrew roots. As a young man, Moses would have been trained and schooled in all things Egyptian as well. For close to 40 years, he's immersed in the language, culture, religion of Egypt. He enjoyed the royal status of Pharaoh. He had access to Egyptian affluence, wisdom, superiority, and luxury and pleasure. But one day, while walking through the city of Egypt, he noticed an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew man. So he takes things into his own hands and he kills the Egyptian overlord. Moses is ultimately called to deliver God's people, but he's not ready yet. In Hebrews chapter 11, it tells us this, that Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be ill-treated with the people of God than to enjoy sin's fleeting pleasures. Ultimately, Moses rejects his place in Egypt. You see, even though Moses was an Egyptian, he was a Hebrew at heart. In our own rationale, it might even seem more effective to stay within the royal household and to leverage Egypt's power for better conditions for your people and country. But God's kingdom is not of this world, and our wisdom and strategies are vastly inferior to his plan. In this moment, we could reasonably disregard the call of God on Moses. He's a murderer and now an outcast. In the eyes of men, he's done. After this catastrophic mistake, he flees to the treacherous desert, full of scorpions, snakes, and marauders, and very little water, food, or shade. Jesus is led by the Spirit into the desert before his earthly ministry. It's in the desert where Abraham is tested. David is tested as he flees his oppressor Saul in the desert. God's people, they wandered for 40 years in the desert before they were ready to enter the promised land. Moses is no different. He's being prepared for his destiny in the desert for 40 years. The desert is your classroom. A monastic saying says it this way: the cell becomes your teacher, And all that will be taught to you in your own cell. The desert is a place of preparation. So why all the hardship? And why all the struggle? Because you're being formed into the image of Christ. Our character, it's flawed. We are impatient and we can be unkind. The natural man wants only to please himself, but the godly man, he dies to himself. James tells us that we should rejoice in hardship because it produces endurance. God has a habit of forming us through adversity. He's in the process of destroying old character flaws and attitudes. He's forming you into His image through the washing of His word. After his 40-year preparation in the desert, Moses comes back to Egypt, but he's a different man, and his purpose hasn't changed. He's still called to defend, but now he's ready. So he stares Pharaoh down and he says, "Let my people go." Same plan, different man. You see, God has given us all our innate gifts and talents to be used for His glory. Every good and perfect gift comes from Him. Moses was a defender, and early in life he failed miserably at it. But at the age of 80 years old, this man walks back into Egypt and announces the emancipation of God's people. What's changed? What's different? Moses has changed. And it's because of his time right here in these deserts.